together. We know them as Winston Zeddemore and the director of Ghostbusters. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Ernie Hudson and Mr. Reitman.
Trying to turn his mic on.
There you go. I think you're on now.
I'm on.
You're on. Thank you guys so much for coming out and joining us. First off, I'd love to get started with a lot about both of your careers through the ages. You know, we'll talk plenty of Ghostbusters down the line, but I want to get started with sort of how you got involved in the industry and sort of started things off. But before we even get to that, amazing announcement. I know WizardWorld and Ghostbusters are working together with Sony Pictures. Next year is the 35th anniversary of Ghostbusters, and we're having a fan fest in June on the Sony lot, which I hope a lot of you are going to attend. So congratulations, 35 years, my gosh, it's pretty amazing.
I don't believe it. The great thing is Sony's going to close up the entire lot in Los Angeles. If you can get down there, get on the internet. When is it? June?
June 8th and 9th, yeah, next year, yes. 2019.
But in terms of when they get tickets, I think...
yeah, it goes live September 17th, so you can get your tickets September 17th. We'll remind you again. You'd be surprised. These people are travelers. Nerds love to travel. We will show up anywhere, any day to support. And I know there's people from all over the place, not just Chicago here. So we'll definitely make it down to LA for sure. So talk a little bit about more of that towards the end. But before that, I always find it interesting, you know, such success for both of you in the industry. But, you know, starting off, I know, Ernie, you studied theater in school. Ivan, I know you started directing and producing films in school. When did you start feeling that bug, right, to be in the industry? And then how did that ultimately lead to sort of your first early successes in film, in the film and TV industry, from both of you?
Well, I thought I was going to be a composer of music. And I was in music school, in fact, up in Canada. And they had a little film club, and I thought I would try my hand. And it was a little film that was called Orientation. It was about the first few days at university of a freshman student. And we did it, and it was very funny. And we were able to actually sell it to 20th Century Fox as a short with theaters while we're still students. And really, many parts of that ended up in Animals. Played by new people, so it was an interesting development.
You mentioned music and composition. Is that something that you've continued pursuing kind of on the side as a hobby, or is that something that you just were really passionate about and then kind of fell by the wayside as you began your career?
I had always dreamed about actually doing a musical, and I've just never been able to do it. I think music plays a very important part in most of the films that I've directed, but really it's a passion project. For some reason I could never get the right thing together.
Ernie, how about yourself? I know, again, went to Yale School for drama, right, after studying. And were you always interested, was your original goal to stick with theater and then sort of film kind of fell into it, or was the goal always TV and film?
Well, I think, I'm from Benton Harbor, Michigan, which is right across the lake. I got out of high school, went to the Marine Corps, got discharged from the Marines, and I was kind of lost. I was just looking for a job. So the line in Ghostbusters that has a steady paycheck in it, I'll believe anything you say. I finally got into college, Wayne State in Detroit, and I saw a play, and I was just blown away, and I got really involved in theater. I graduated, got a scholarship to Yale, and I thought theater would be what I'd do for the rest of my life, but I began to realize that the people I was in school with were teaching, and I didn't want to teach. I wanted to do it. So I made it to LA. I got married, I should say, and the marriage ended, and the 2 kids came with me. So I went to LA because my brother's there, and I knew I'd have backup, with the kids. So and that's kind of how I was getting around doing some films, and I'm probably here. I never got the chance to before, but this man, Ivan Reitman, changed, I think, the trajectory of my life. I mean, I was wanting to do a television show called Ryan's 4 that Henry Winkler was one of the producers on, and I really wanted this job. I mean, really, really, really wanted to, because I was going to be a doctor on ABC, and I auditioned. I thought I was so good for the part, but Henry was not in the room, and so they sent me back. And as I was going in, Henry was leaving, and so I got a call from my agent saying that I didn't get Ryan's 4, which was just devastating. But I got a movie called Adventures in the Creep Zone. And I wasn't really excited about it, but it turned out to be a movie. The name was changed to Space Hunter, that Ivan produced and gave me a job a year before Ghostbusters. And between that and Ghostbusters, I really got involved in film and television.
It's amazing how that works out like that. You know, that you immediately in the moment feel this distraught feeling, you know, of losing something, and you get something that you weren't so happy about, but then it led ultimately to this partnership.
Sure, yeah.
It's the movie, yeah, and I mean, all the films, you know, that you've created, Ivan, you know, starting with producing Animal House and moving on to Meatballs Drive, you know, there really is this camaraderie or this, you know, fraternity of brothers, if you will, you know, of comedy legends and icons that all have worked together. Did you ever envision all those people coming together like that and then just really lasting throughout for a majority of your career, you know, in terms of meeting all these amazing comedic legends?
Well, I was doing these small movies in Canada, and I actually had a Broadway show. That's really how I got to America. And there was it was called The Magic Show, by the way, and ran for about 5 years. But I was a big fan of the National Lampoon magazine, and it was really the most important sort of humor magazine of its time. It grew out of the Harvard Lampoon prior to it. And I just cold called the publisher of the magazine because I thought he'd be good to know. We'll try to create a comedy. I'll try to create a comedy film with him. And he said, "Look, I'm not interested in that, but I want to do the stage show. You've got the show on Broadway. Why don't you help me?" I said, "Okay, whatever." And the show was called the National Lampoon Show, and this is before Saturday Night Live, before SCTV. The show ended up starring John Belushi, Gilda Radner, Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, and Brian Doyle Murray, Bill's older brother. And I sat there and I said, I've never seen people this funny in any one place. And they represented a whole new school of comedy and just a whole new ability. And most of them got picked off and went on to Saturday Night Live. Harold Ramis, for whatever reason, did not get hired by Saturday Night Live. Part of my deal with the National Lampoon was if any part of that show that we did off Broadway could end up as a movie, I would get to hopefully direct it, but at least produce it. And so I went to Harold and I said, look, let's go work on this film based on this show. And that movie turned out to be Animal House. I mean, it took about 2 years, but Harold, along with Chris Miller and Doug Kenny, ended up writing this brilliantly funny script.
You mentioned some of the film that you made in college. There were scenes from that. What were some of the specific examples of things that you pulled from your just fun kind of messing around college years?
I mean, the whole opening with the beanies and showing up at the fraternity, the Don Sutherland smoking dope with the kids in the closet was right out of The Short. It didn't have Don Sutherland, but it was local kids.
You mentioned it was this new type of comedy going on, and I think that's why these movies were so successful, because we were getting that intelligent idiot type character, right? That was new at the time, and it's written, you know, very intelligently. You know, you were portraying these dumb individuals doing silly things, you know what I mean? But it comes from an intelligent point. I think that's why they last, and you know, they last in the the time, you know what I mean, throughout.
Well, more importantly, it represented the language of the baby boom generation.
Yeah.
You know, up to then, comedy was, you know, we were coming out of the era of, you know, Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis, and Bill Cosby. Not Bill Cosby, but yeah, let's not talk about Bill Cosby. That's a confusing reference. I don't even know how I went there. And finally, Animal House suddenly resonated.
Yeah.
I mean, there were movies that represented the baby boom generation in the 60s, but they were pretty serious. So there's things like Easy Rider and Putney Swope and things like that, but were quite dramatic, but nobody was doing comedies.
Was there a point, it obviously started off as, all these films, you know, started off from Animal House to Meatballs to Stripes, you know, they had this kind of underground cult following. I think that was great, because a lot of people at the time were following these individual comedy theaters, you know, and these comedy performers and seeing them on SNL. Was there a point where you realized it was all kind of coming together and that this was becoming super popular and you guys were creating this new genre of comedy?
Well, we never even thought of it that way, but the amazing thing was it was popular right away. Animal House, you know, was a sensation. I had a very hot streak for about 12 years. I had, I think, 12 movies that were #1 films, and I mean, the amazing thing about Ghostbusters that it is almost hard to believe right now is it opened in #1. I remember Steven Spielberg's Indiana Jones opened the week before, and you know, he was formidable competition. And Ghostbusters came out and just sort of beat it a little bit in the second week. And then Ghostbusters stayed in the #1 box office position for every single week of the entire summer, except for one. I think a Clint Eastwood movie beat it dropped to #2, and then next week it came back to #1.
But in that long-staying power, it had to feel good to knock Steven Spielberg off the top there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever recollected that back to him and been like, I don't know if you remember this, but we took you down?
I didn't say that yet.
There's some things you don't say between. Ernie, how about the success factor for you? When did you realize, like, oh man, you know, after filming the movie and everything and going through it, was there a point where you realized Ghostbusters was as big as it was and was becoming, you know, a huge success?
Well, I think for me, it was the second movie that I shot. Well, on Space Hunter, Ivan and the guys brought me to New York to promote the movie. It was the first time really sort of being in New York. And Ghostbusters was the first movie that I actually shot in New York with the guys. And that was pretty phenomenal experience. And, but it just felt different and it felt special. But, you know, normally a movie would come out and it would be, you know, in the theater for a few weeks and then it would disappear and the next thing would come along. And the strange thing with Ghostbusters was it just kept growing, and it's been growing for like 35 years. I mean, there's something about it that was uniquely different, and so that's always been amazing to me. But I think even while we were making it, when we first got to New York, it was just a really special experience. You know.
How was it at the time? I know things have changed in terms of filming and, you know, in New York and things like that, and there's a lot more specifics in terms of getting spots and getting sets and everything. How was it shooting at the time in the city? I mean, I know you guys went back and forth, did a lot of the on-set stuff in California, but then did a ton of like on-location things, and that's why it has such a good, fun, you know, New York feel to it, because of all those external shots and all those things in New York. Was it crazy? Were there like crowds everywhere? You know what I mean? How was shooting in the city?
I made about 4 movies over the years in New York. Shooting Ghostbusters was by far the most fun we ever had. And it was tough. What I learned really quickly, because it was the first one I shot in New York, was that you just had to go with the flow. You can't fight it. You have to, you know there's going to be a lot of people around, and you can't force them to go where they don't want to go. And so I basically made them extras. And it was, you know, we built into the script the whole idea of the Ghostbusters becoming famous and people wearing the t-shirts and cheering them on and everything, and we just used the real crowds and started putting them in, and I just started directing the crowd and getting them to do stuff, and it helped the energy both for the actors, and everybody was having kind of a good time. The amazing thing about Ghostbusters is it just came together. In March of 1983, I read a treatment that Dan Aykroyd had written for himself and John Belushi, and then John had passed away. But it was Ghost Chasers, I think, at that time. It was the name of it, or Ghostbusters, and it took place in outer space sometime in the future, and it had many competing groups of Ghostbusters, but it had these brilliant ideas in it. Brilliant idea number one is that there was technology that you could catch ghosts, and that there were actually many groups of people who, you know, acting much like firemen went out and caught them. So I sat down with Danny. I said, look, this script is impossible to make. It's way too expensive. There's stunts and there's special effects, and this is before there's digital effects, so everything had to be done real. And I don't think we can do this. And I don't think it's the right story, although it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
And I suggested to him that we do this, that should be set in New York, contemporary New York, make these guys, you know, parapsychologists working at a university to get kicked out, and it's really a going into business story where you've picked a business very unusual, but you picked at the right time because bad things were happening. And we use that very thin thread as the structural idea. I also told them, I don't think it should be for 2 people, it should be 3, and then eventually it became for 4. And I thought that we should bring Harold Ramis in as one of the co-writers. By then I had worked with Harold on, of course, on the Lampoon Show, and then Animal House, and then Meatballs, and he came in to help out on Stripes. So I always felt of him that he was like the brother I never had, and that he was the clever writer that I wish I could be, and that he would help out in the construction of it, where Aykroyd had this sort of brilliance, this conceptual brilliance that is very, very unusual and almost unique. Harold had a way to make real human dialogue and real human comedy out of these situations. And so the 3 of us went off. Well, even before that, I pitched this literally 4 days after this little luncheon meeting with Danny, where he just said, yeah, let's go do that. And he'd been struggling to find somebody to make the movie with. And he was very helpful in terms of going along with it. I went into Columbia Studios with only 2 people, the head of the studio and the marketing head. And I told the story very much like I just told it right now. This is what it's going to be, and it's going to be Bill Murray, and it's going to be Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis. Ernie wasn't involved just yet, but it's coming. And he said, okay, fine, yeah, we'll do it. And how much do you think it'll cost? I had no idea what it would cost. We didn't even have a script yet. And Stripes had cost $10 million, so I decided, well, I'll go crazy. I'll triple that amount. Yeah. And I just said $30 million to him, and he said, okay.
Did you stay in budget? What was the final budget?
We actually, well, that's the whole story of the making. Everything just fell into line.
Yeah.
All he said is it has to be ready by June the 8th, 1984, which was 13 months after that meeting. So we had no script. There was no special effects house because there was only one really great visual effects house, and that was ILM, and that was already busy doing that Steven Spielberg movie we were just talking about. And I said, well, we're going to have to build an effects house on top of that because we got to start like right now. Even though we haven't designed anything, we don't even know who the ghosts are or what we're going to have. And they stood up. They wrote a $5 million check out of the 30 to Richard Edlund, who had worked on, I can't even remember right now, oh my God. And he set up a company that started the visual effects. Literally took about 2 months to build the company, but by the summertime, he was starting to work. And Harold, Dan, and I all went out to Martha's Vineyard. I think the 4th of July weekend of 1983. And we basically wrote the script together in a 2-week period. Our families were there. We had 3 separate houses, and we would get together and work all day, and families would all get together and have dinners, sometime just all together or sometimes ourselves. It was very communal and a spectacular experience. And we left 2 weeks later with the draft. Now it was very close to the movie that you now have gotten to know. I mean, the one final thing I want to say about Ghostbusters is I was very lucky because different people just contributed wonderful things to it. Yeah. And so here we were working on the script very quickly, doing the effects right from the beginning, and various people I remember when Sigourney Weaver came into audition for the role of Dana Barrett, and you know, by then she had done Alien and years of Living Dangerously. But she was still auditioning. She had heard about it. She wasn't really a big star, but she was really smart, and she spoke about the script in a very intelligent way. And at some point, she stopped and said, "You know, I was reading the script, and I really think that Dana Barrett should become a dog." And I said, "Really?" "Yeah." She said, "I should be possessed." And she got on my coffee table at my office on all fours and started howling like a dog. I said, "Wow, this is a really cool idea." And Sigourney Weaver, all 6'4" of her, is sitting on my coffee table. I remember calling up Harold right after that and said, "Look, Dana Barrett was just howling like a dog in my office. I think it was a good idea." And we were really struggling with what to do. We had this idea of a keymaster and a gatekeeper. We didn't really have it worked out yet, and just that little comment, worked out. John Candy was in Stripes, and it was his first American movie. I think he had done a couple of small Canadian films, and he became quite a star off of Stripes. And so I naturally called him up because I thought he would be perfect for the guy down the hall, to Dana Barrett, who bugged her. And he read this. I sent him the script. He said, "Yeah, love working with you, Ivan. Yeah, we should do this." I sent it to him, and literally the next day he calls back and says, "I thought I should play him with a German accent. I should have dogs, like big German shepherds." I said, "You can't have dogs. There's dogs on the roof. It's going to be confusing to everybody." He said, "Look, I can't do it. I want to play him like a German guy." I said, "I don't think that's going to work." And we parted ways. And I knew Rick Moranis from, there was this wonderful community of very funny people that I grew up with in Toronto, one of which was Rick Moranis. But we had never worked together. But I called him up and I said, "Rick, I want to do this movie. I got to be honest with you. I offered it to John Candy, who was another Canadian from up there, and he's turned it down, but I think he made a mistake. Would you read it, please?" And he said, "Okay." He read it and called me an hour after he got it. And he said, "Thank God John Candy's an idiot. He should have done
this." It's amazing how it all works out like that, how it all came together.
It was just, John Candy would have done his own kind of version, but not like a German guy. And if I could have talked him out of it. But Rick Moranis just was spectacular. And I said, "Look, Rick, there's really no part here. Can you just work on stuff?" And he came up with this brilliant accountant guy. Virtually 90% of his lines, were written by him. Yeah. That brilliant one take when he's, at the party he has, where he welcomes the people in, and it's one long, continuous shot, and he opens the door, and there's the terror dog for the first time alive. And it's one of my favorite shots in the film, both because of the combination of comedy, performance, and surprise that are part of it. Am I babbling a little bit?
No, oh my gosh, we're loving it. Wait, come on, you hear the silence out there. Yeah, we're loving it. So what we came to hear, it's a testament to the movie, like you said. You know, there was a brilliant idea that a bunch of people then brought together and really shaped. And that's what's so awesome and why I think it's lasted, is it is this fun story of, you know, ordinary people, if you will, in this extraordinary situation, and how each person brought, each actor, each performer, you know, each part of this, you know, brought their own element to it, which is amazing. You mentioned Winston wasn't, you know, originally 1, you were thinking 3. Where did that sort of inception of that character come into play?
As we were writing it, we realized, well, because these guys were all university professors, and of course Bankman was the cynical one and the salesman. We always thought one was going to be the mouth, and one was the heart, and one was the brains. I'll let you figure out who was who. But we realized they all knew everything, and there was all this technical stuff that we had to get across to our audience. And so we thought at the end of the first act, it turns out I think even earlier, we had to bring in a new character who they can explain things to, and who would who would really become the voice in the ears of the audience.
Yeah, he becomes the audience character that we identify with, kind of like we got these silly, crazy guys, and then we've got, you know, from the streets of New York, Winston coming in, you know, and setting them straight.
You didn't audition, did you, Ernie? I can't remember. How did we?
Well, see,
I knew we worked together, but
yeah, well,
I can't remember.
Well, that's what time does. I auditioned 3 or 4 times.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Like, again? They want to see me again? No, it's, you know, it's funny because this is absolutely fascinating to hear, because we've never actually talked about any of this stuff in detail. So I'm just really, I love hearing you, because as an actor, I don't know any of that stuff. All I know is I got to get a job. They're doing a movie now. The fact that they're meeting in Martha's Vineyard, the fact that all this other stuff is going on, you never know that, because all you see is they want me to come in, and I got to do it again, and do I get the job or don't get the job? And so, yeah, no, it was a long process, but I'm thankful it worked out.
You bring an awesome energy to the movie that really fits in well with all of the other characters. And we were talking a little bit earlier before about just the energy of New York, filming in New York, and those people. You know, any fun just stories about that energy of the actors and, you know, the cast, you know, and having fun together while shooting and filming?
Well, you know, a lot of times people ask me for like funny stories, or, you know, I'm not a you know, one of those kind of pranksters. I don't do that sort of thing. I was just sort of coming into, I'd done a couple of little movies. In fact, I worked with John on a film before then, called, I remember, The Going Berserk. Anyway, but for me, this was kind of new. This was new with some people who had been doing it for a long time. So I was a bit, not in awe, but it was just magical in a lot of ways. So I think, like I said, just being on the streets of New York, seeing everybody just come together in a way. I mentioned Ivan a couple of times about just being with Bill Murray, hanging out, or even just shooting on the streets, and how fans just, you know, went nuts. Guys would, you know, slam on their brakes. You know, taxis would stop in the middle of the street and run over, and just that was a learning experience, and it was a wonderful sort of basis for what was to happen for the rest of my career, just in terms of how you carry yourself, how you take all this stuff in, and so it was all just sort of eye-opening in a wonderful way.
Yeah, it's an awesome way to describe it. Yeah.
I think the one that I remember the most, right in front of Dana Barrett's building, the main building, which is it's a real apartment building that I actually just visited for the first time a few weeks ago. You know, that's the place where the ground breaks and they fall into the hole, and a taxi cab or I can't remember, falls in. And we actually did it live in California at I think the Warner's Ranch, where we built a replica of the bottom floor of that building and that sidewalk. And we had a photograph of what that would look like. But we had to shoot the ending of that actually at the building itself. And we had a brilliant production designer named John DeCure Sr. I think he was nominated for 18 Academy Awards. in his lifetime. He's now passed away, unfortunately. But he was able to overnight, lift up the, had these beautiful huge styrofoam pieces and the car and everything else. So it really looks like something terrible had happened overnight. And there were news reports on the radio. People stopped getting on buses and said, "Oh my God, there was an earthquake in front of that building on Central Park West." It was fun. It was really fun. Because we were on such a short schedule, we were rewriting all the time. We finished shooting. We shot the film in 60 days, which is not a lot, considering we did almost every effect live. So the cards that fly and most of that was done in some combination of old style visual effects and mostly physical effects, so the actors could feel what it was like to go through that process.
Right.
And I had such a brilliant ensemble of actors who, not only brought reality to the situation, but could improvise in a certain kind of way that, they weren't faking it because they were sort of living it.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of emotional resonance to all those scenes that I think are quite effective, because the tone of the movie is both really comedic, kind of scary at times, which is all very unusual and fairly dramatic. We finished shooting in January, and the movie's coming out in June. We haven't seen any visual effects. I had a wonderful editor who I've worked with about 20 times, and this was the first time we were working together, and he managed to assemble the movie within 3 weeks after we finished shooting. It had no visual special effects in it. So, like, when the Ghostbusters shot their proton guns, there's nothing that came out. They were just going, and they were doing all that stuff, but you didn't see anything. And they were looking at ghosts, and there was like a guy. There were even crew members in the shot that were going to be taken out later on. And I said, look, we have to show it to an audience, because we don't have enough time. We better know that we have the story. And I was really worried about the Marshmallow Man. I think it's time to talk about that.
Let's open up about the Marshmallow Man.
I forgot to say that the other brilliant thing in Aykroyd's script, the treatment, that way, the outer space treatment. So there were maybe 80 ghosts and goblins and things that were in it, one of which was the Marshmallow Man, and it appeared in the first act.
Right.
And I don't know, there was just something about that idea that seemed really intriguing, but at the same time it scared the crap out of me, because I thought, up to now the movie's kind of realistic, even if it's goofy. Suddenly this 60-foot thing walking down Central Park, I don't know if that's going to work. That's maybe the thing that throws us out. So I said, let's have a screening, and we had 2 shots, because it's basically a guy in a big outfit, right? A thing on his head. We had the first shot of the Marshmallow Man's head behind those buildings.
The building, coming up
in downtown, and of course I had all that live stuff on. I can't believe what they let me do on the streets. It was an easier time to shoot.
Yeah, exactly.
It was before 9/11. There was a whole, there was a great ease about the city that unfortunately no longer exists there. And so we screened the movie 3 weeks after we finished shooting. It was like the greatest screening I ever went to of that movie. The people screamed. I think when Dana Barrett opens up the fridge, very early on the film. Now the egg stuff was real because we actually did it. So we had things to make all those eggs pop, and that was actually a burner on top that looked like countertop. So those eggs were really frying. But when she opens up the fridge, that was meant to be visual effects that we didn't have. So in that screening, when she opened up the fridge, it just said, "Shot missing." It got the greatest response.
Yeah.
People went crazy.
Because you were imagining it.
Yeah, and it was frankly much better than anything we ended up getting in the visual.
How the Stay Puft? How was the first reaction to the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man? I know you were saying that you had a couple of shots of the face and then just a man in a costume coming down.
The screening was going really well. We're up to that point. And I'm going, oh God, oh God, oh God. And as soon as that head bobbed, and it was a kind of goofy way that it moves, and even that audience literally started screaming.
Nice.
And I said, oh, thank God. And it was so satisfying.
Yeah.
And they didn't have there was nothing else until, we dumped a whole bunch of shaving cream on Bill Atherton's head, and then we had all those big pieces really on the street in Central Park.
It's amazing, and that's again, a testament to the movie. How you said it was the truthfulness that all the actors brought to it, right? It's that line that Dan Aykroyd says. He's like, it's the first thing that popped in my head, the Stay Puft Marshmallow, and instantly we're in it, and we don't care what's, we know it's something silly coming down the street, but it's something they have to fight. It's just as ferocious if it were Godzilla or something like that,
And it made sequels very tough to make. First of all, Bill never wanted to make a sequel. We all sort of wanted to do because we had such a good time. We made a lot of money, I'll be fair. And the studio was desperate to do a sequel. We put them off for about 5 years, and we could never, and I liked the second movie a lot, and now people seem to like it a lot more than they did. Because in those 5 years, the world really changed, and the sense of what was right, the zeitgeist of the country changed. And Batman, that very first Batman, that was really pretty remarkable, and it changed what people were thinking about in these kinds of movies. And so, I wanted to make a much more character-based film, and it's really about Bill and Sigourney having this baby, and it's really very humanistly based. And we had the hardest time trying to come up with some kind of climax for the film. We ended up with the Statue of Liberty, which I don't think quite works, but I'm really proud of the rest of the movie. And we could never come up with that this kind of idea of, I was trying to think of the most interesting thing, and that popped in my head, and it was such a clever way of bringing on the Marshmallow Man, and I think it was one of the reasons that it worked so well. And we couldn't come up with anything that even came close to that for the...
Nothing will beat the Marshmallow Man, yeah. Like you said though, at the time maybe, I think there was a lot of reaction just to it being a sequel, but now, my gosh, I don't think you can talk to anyone in this room that says they don't love Ghostbusters 2, as equal or, close to the first one. Let's get to some of these questions out here. I know there's some people I've been patiently waiting. We're getting a little short on time. Hey, what's up?
Hi, I'm Danielle. My question for Ivan is, what advice can you offer to an aspiring filmmaker looking to break into the industry?
Well, just make films. It's a lot easier today than it was. That very first short film that I talked about at the beginning of our talk today was all shot in 16 millimeter. The longest take I could make was 30 seconds because you had to hand crank it. You had to buy the film, which was really expensive. You had to send it to a laboratory to process. You got a work print. I had only these roller things by hand to look at it on a viewfinder. Your camera, the one you have in your pocket right now, is way more sophisticated than anything that was available, including when we made the big movie. So you've got everything you need, and it sinks down. Go ahead and make it.
Just do it, right? Awesome.
I had an experience seeing Ghostbusters in probably the early 90s on the Disney Channel that I've never been able to corroborate or explain, but it seemed like they had a cut using alternate takes to make a more family-friendly version. So I have been curious for years how that came about, or if that's something that was put together, or if that's something you know about.
Hey, I didn't know Ernie, had to audition 3 times.
Yeah.
I think I was there.
Yeah. Not so concerned about the Disney Channel cut from the 1990s.
I mean, I don't remember that right now, but it's quite possible. I mean, I had cutting rights on everything. I mean, it was when you look at the movie right now, and it's amazing, almost all of you have brought your children who have them, and we never thought that, 4 or 5-year-olds were going to go see this film. We were making a film for us, at whatever age we were then, which was in our 30s. And so I think, I know there was an airplane version that you always had to agree to make cuts for airplanes, So I have a feeling that's what you saw.
It is interesting to say that, you didn't set out to make a family film, if you will, or a family-friendly film, but it really is a film that's great for all ages, and has had this staying power, and has these different cuts, and has now lived on in, video games and cartoons and animated series,
You ain't seen nothing yet.
Uh-oh. Anything that we would be excited to hear about?
I can't be specific today, I promise.
No worries, no worries. More for the fans coming up.
There's some big things coming.
Awesome. Yeah, there we go.
I think you'll be really happy.
Hey.
So there are stories about how much of the movie was actually improv, and I was wondering, how much of the final cut deviated from the script?
Well, even the script evolved because part of, Harold used to say a wonderful thing. He always thought that the shooting was the final draft of the writing. And I would do improv in a slightly different way than it's become today. And I really believed in it. I grew up with it, and improv was a part of every movie that I directed, including the serious ones. But I would always try to do exactly the way the script was written first. And when I was really happy that we had every take proper, I would always say, okay, it's the free one. Remember I used to say that, Ernie. In terms of, and the actors were allowed to do what they wanted or to come up with alternative lines. But it was always within the spirit of the movie we're making, and the characters had to make sense within the story that we were telling. And we would often sort of huddle after each take, and I would go and say, wow, hey Bill, that line, that was really great, and Harold, do you mind if we give this one to Ernie? I think we should, that'd be better coming out of his character. And there was a, because they had all come up through Second City mostly, where it was all about listening. Yeah, they deserve
Chicago,
it.
yes.
Yeah, and there's an extraordinary generosity. It was about working together on a scene, and a bunch of them had worked together for many, many years. And so it was very easy to reapportion the lines, and even Bill, who later had something of a cantankerous reputation, really was so generous with everything. And I could say to him, that paragraph that you just hit, that was great, but could you leave this and this out? And get back to the script right over here. And that's the way we built it during the shooting.
Ernie, you mentioned starting off being
but
involved.
on that note, I will also say the improv. Pretty much, I get people come up and they'll quote a lot of lines from Winston, especially from the first movie. And that was really, I love this town, the last line of the Twinkie stuff. The guys were so generous because I think that's a great line, and yet they were willing to include and share, and that's really special and unusual in this business. So yeah, I remember it was very, very important.
That's exactly what I was going to ask you. Yeah, it felt like, even like you said, you were coming in awe to start, and they had their own little fraternity, if you will, that you were just completely accepted right away, and were one of the boys.
Well, yeah, but I grew up in because I didn't come from not just Hollywood, where I didn't know anybody in the industry, and so there's a tendency that I developed to sort of hold back a bit, and you almost want to be invited. And I think had the guys been different, it whatever, but they were always inclusive, especially Harold. And I'll always be very appreciative of him because the guys always sort of would see me standing over there and kind of go, Ernie, come on, you know, I'd go to people's houses as a kid and they'd sit down to eat, and so unless I was invited, I was just not, you know. But that's, I think, a fear of getting your feelings hurt. But it was great to be a part of this group that were really just very, very open and caring. It meant a lot to me.
Amazing. Hey.
How you guys doing? So, as we can tell, Ghostbusters resonates with so many people, so many generations. It's been 34 years now that it came out. I was born in 1984, literally like 2 weeks after the movie came out. And one of my earliest memories is seeing Ghostbusters as a child, along with the animated series and whatnot. And Ghostbusters 1, 2, they kind of just one giant story to me. Love them both equally. It's absolutely my favorite movie, hands down. And this might fall under the classified, non-specific, whatever, and I'm sure a lot of people are always wondering, and I don't know if you can talk about it, but will there be any chance of another live action film, especially with some of the original characters?
There will be some important announcements within the last year, and you should sign up for FanFest, June 8th through 9th next year. And maybe you'll hear some of those announcements. And tickets go on sale September 17th at Ghostbusters.com and WizardWorld.com. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry we're out of time for questions, but you can go meet both of these gentlemen at their booths. Please give it up one more time for the legendary Ernie Hudson.